Welcome to A Study in Sherlock, a Sherlock Holmes reread. My name is Stephen Lee, and I used to be a federal prosecutor in Chicago, investigating and prosecuting real-life criminal cases. I love the Sherlock Holmes stories, and I think they have some great advice for real-life investigations. And so I wanted to look back at the stories with the help of my two kids, Allison and Josh. Today we're going to begin by talking about the first Sherlock Holmes story, A Study in Scarlet, and we're going to begin with a synopsis.
So Dr. Watson meets Sherlock Holmes in London, and they end up becoming roommates. Dr. Watson accompanies Holmes as he investigates the murder of Enoch Drebber, which he was asked to do by inspectors from Scotland Yard, which is police. First they go to the crime scene, an abandoned house, and Holmes discovers several clues that the police don't look into that much. After investigating those clues, he quickly deduces that the murderer of Enoch Drebber was a man named Jefferson Hope.
So when you get down to it, how Holmes solved the case was actually fairly simple, and he did it by investigating a few key clues. First, Holmes saw two sets of footprints walking into the house, and he saw wild horse prints outside on the street. And the two sets of footprints meant that the murderer and Drebber, who was killed, walked into the house together. And the wild horse prints meant that the cab driver wasn't there to calm the horse down, which meant that the cab driver and the murderer must be the same person. Second, he saw that there were no wounds on Drebber's body, which meant that the murderer must have killed Drebber with poison. Third, he figured out the murderer's name, Jefferson Hope, and he figured this out by finding a wedding ring at the crime scene, which meant that it was a murder over love. So, with this information, he telegrammed Cleveland about Enoch Drebber's love life, and he found that there was a man named Jefferson Hope, who he had a disagreement over a woman named Lucy Ferrier. And with this information, he figured out the murderer's name, Jefferson Hope, and that he was a cab driver.
Sherlock Holmes talked in a later story about how he wanted to collect the whole art of deduction into one textbook. He never got around to doing that, but stories like A Study in Scarlet do offer useful advice for real-life investigations. And this story has 5 great tips. First, know how other cases have been solved. Sherlock Holmes was a great detective in part because he knew the history of crime and knew the history of how crimes had been solved before. And he was able to take that knowledge and apply it to other cases. So when he got to the crime scene here, he brought with him that knowledge and knew what to look for. And that's how he saw things that the police detectives had missed. Second, Sherlock Holmes tried to get direct information himself, rather than relying on what other people had told him other people had said, what the law considers hearsay. Here, specifically, Sherlock Holmes didn't just rely on what Inspector Gregson and Inspector Lestrade said about the police officer who had found the body. Holmes went to the officer himself to ask additional questions so he could get the fullest picture possible of what had happened at the crime scene. Third, Sherlock Holmes focused on the unusual aspects of the case, particularly the ones that turned out to be Jefferson Hope's mistakes. Those unusual aspects of the case were crucial because those were things that Jefferson Hope couldn't really control. Jefferson Hope was actually a very smart criminal, and he actually left a red herring for Holmes. He wrote the German word for revenge on the wall of the crime scene, thinking that that would help distract people from him. Holmes ignored that and focused on the mistakes Jefferson Hope had made, the horse prints that were left behind, and the ring that he found on the scene. Fourth, Sherlock Holmes helped solve the crime by focusing on the motive of the crime. Now that's something that I was taught as a young prosecutor. that crimes are generally motivated by profit or by passion. And Sherlock Holmes applied the same lesson in his investigation. And here he was able to determine that this wasn't a crime of profit because nothing had been taken, and that left passion. And that's how he was able to narrow the scope of possible suspects to someone who had a long-standing grudge against Enoch Drebber, who turned out to be Jefferson Hope. Fifth, Sherlock Holmes was able to solve the crime in part because he tested his theory. He had very strong suspicions that the wedding ring was important, but he was able to test that by placing an advertisement in the local newspapers about the ring and to see who would show up. Sherlock Holmes suspected that the crime was committed by poison, and he was able to test that by giving a mixture of that poison to an old dog who was already sick and seeing that the dog did in fact die after taking that mixture. These were ways that Sherlock Holmes was able to test his theories and thus able to advance his investigations in really strong, positive ways.
For more information about a study in Scarlet, such as historical accuracy and why Dr. Watson might have lied, go to our website at studyinsherlock.com.
Also, stay tuned for our next episode, where we will be talking about The Sign of the Four, the next Sherlock Holmes story.
Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed.